Good afternoon. On behalf of the Environmental Change and Security Program, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wilson Center for this important session on government leadership in sustainability. I am Paulo Sotero, the director of the Brazil Institute, and my program and the ECSP programs collaborate in a series that Tom Lovejoy and George Mason University brought to the Wilson Center. Tom, among other things, very important to us because he is a member of the advisory board of the Brazil Institute. So we are here this afternoon to listen to one person that has important responsibility on government leadership in sustainability, because I believe, Ms. Johnson, you controlled a lot of real estate that belongs to the people of the United States, the government of the United States, including this building. Mm-hmm. And we will also, Tom Lovejoy will introduce the speakers, but we have also the honor to, in addition of having Ms. Martha Johnson with us, of also having Christopher Baumgartner, who is the Sustainability Outreach and Communications Coordinator for George Mason University. With that, I would like to pass the floor to Tom Lovejoy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paolo, and thanks to all of you for coming out on the eve of our holiday time. And it turns out all the students are either finishing overdue things or have already gone home. But since this is going to be recorded, we'll be able to use it in sessions at George Mason in the coming year. So for those of you not familiar with this series, Managing Our Planet, it started about a year or so ago, and it revolves around the idea that the kinds of sustainability issues that society on a global scale is facing are sufficiently substantial that we really need to be looking all the time at how you can bring sort of counter management to scale. And so when I had the privilege of meeting Martha Johnson out at Aspen last June, and I began to get an inkling of what her leadership means in this area through the GSA, I instantly said, you must be part of our series. And so here we are. We actually managed to schedule it. And I think it's going to be a fascinating presentation. I won't go into Martha Johnson's bio because you have it available to you. But it's a really interesting mix of private sector, government, international policy. She could not be more suited for the kinds of things that she is actually doing through her leadership at the GSA. And a much more recent person that I met is Chris Baumgartner. I actually met him last week. Who plays a really important role in sustainability at George Mason University itself. So I asked him if he would be so kind, after we have heard from the administrator of GSA, to sort of reflect on how what George Mason is doing relates to that, and which ways it actually makes direct sense, and other ways one has to do things differently. So with no more ado, I would invite Chris to join me in the front row, and Martha to enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, thank you all. Thank you for the introduction, and I want to be sure I got two clickers here. Do I use this one on the right? This one. Okay, got it. All right, well, I have some slides to focus you on the message that I want to carry, and I am going to plow through a lot, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A time so that we can really unpack what I'm talking about according to what you're particularly interested in. GSA, Managing Our Planet, Government Leadership in Sustainability. I'm going to be talking about sustainability on a couple of different levels, and let me first introduce you to GSA itself. GSA was founded by Harry S. Truman. This is his own self-portrait, and we serve, I want to give you a sense of how we have been organized. We were set up to take advantage of big buys. You know, if we can have centralized procurement for the government, we could be getting better prices. A very simple idea and a very powerful one. To that end, and therefore we service a lot of the government and do that kind of joined up work, and that has helped for a long time. For a long time we were a monopoly. We were the mandated supplier to the government. That was changed in the 1990s, so we're a little bit more market-facing now and competitive. Many of our clients could go to the private sector if they want to buy certain things, or they can buy them through us. But more on that in a minute. GSA manages a lot, and I just want to give you a scope here. We have about 370 million square feet of real estate, some 12 million products, not on our shelves, but essentially arrangements with the private sector where we have vetted companies so that federal workers can buy more easily into those companies without a whole lot of competitive process. We sort of pre-vet and carry some 12 million products for them to have access to. We are responsible for about 400,000 vehicles, so I have a big vehicle fleet. That makes me a big car gal. We also manage some 10 million trips a year for the government. If you really think about scope and scale, this is where it really adds up. Overall, there's about $65 billion in purchasing that flow through us, and we can take it up to about $95 billion if we talk about what the credit cards that we manage cover and some other things that sort of we touch. But at any rate, we're big, and that means that we have a very complicated business strategy because we do everything for everybody. And if you are in business school and trying to think about where your business plan should go, we are a little bit perplexing on that front. And let me just explain that we service the federal government primarily, but it is all the federal government. We service the judiciary as well as the legislative branch. We also do some $800 million right now a year with state and local governments, often in response to disasters and under particular authorities. But it isn't as if we can really sort of narrow in on a customer and get really focused about it. So we are doing everything for everybody. I like to think of us as a fulcrum for government. And I want to be sure you take in this concept because it helps you help us think about how we can really leverage what we need to be doing. In many ways, we're very lucky because under President Obama, we are perceived by the administration to be a strategic asset. In the past, I think we were just seen as, sort of the company store. But this administration understands that we are in a place where there's a lot happening and we touch a lot. So we can be an important fulcrum across the government for various messages. In essence, the challenge is that we can make and move markets. And we need to be very careful about this, but we are such a big player that if we lean in one direction, we can kind of influence the market in various ways, and that is something we need to take very seriously. If you think about government, government has a number of different ways that it can leverage its power. It can legislate, it can regulate, and it can also incentivize. And we're sort of in the incentivized business. Where and how we go and how we do things can steer industry in certain directions, can send some big messages across the economy. To that end, there's also one other way in which we are a fulcrum, and that is that we are a smallish agency in terms of numbers of people, but we are positioned to go first. And that's an important concept across government because government does not like to take certain kinds of risk. We are not allowed to take certain kinds of risks, and it's important for GSA, I think, to play this role of trying things out first. For example, last June, we went on the cloud as GSA for our email. Now, cloud is pretty common in the commercial world. It is not as common in the government, and for us to put ourselves out there trying using email in the cloud. I'm not in prison. We haven't given away state secrets. It can be done. We're saving money. It's a good example. So our going first is very important. So our fulcrum status is one that I take very seriously. And even though we have a rather broad sweep of agenda, I want us to be choosing those ways in which we can play with the leverage that we have across the entire government. Now, let me talk about sustainability. And this is pretty important. GSA's mission, and you know government agencies go by their missions. Our mission is to provide innovative solutions to our customers so that they can deliver on their mission. And by so doing, support a sustainable, innovative, effective government for the American people. Sustainability in this sense is very, very broad and deep, and it is of the moment. We are about helping the government sustain its mission. And I take this very seriously because right now agencies are under huge budget crunches. They are not just being told to go on diets. They are being seriously, the income stream to them is being seriously changed. And they are genuinely worried about some of their mission. It's putting mission into a more vulnerable setting. And at GSA, we need to focus on helping them deliver on their mission. What does that mean in this budget crunch? It means that we need to help them find resources to apply to mission because their mission resources are being depleted. So we take very seriously this notion that we are about the sustainability of our government and the mission of our government. So I can talk about that, but inside that is the environmental sustainability agenda. And I see environmental sustainability as the first discipline of sustainability. It is the way in which we can genuinely unpack methodologies, measures, analysis, information about how to do things more efficiently and effectively. And with that, we will be contributing to the sustainability of our government and indeed the sustainability of our nation. So big circles surround the notion of environmental sustainability. The President has given us a number of strong signals, not the least of which are executive orders, about how to move in a more sustainable direction. We have a particular order that was issued, I think, over 2 years ago in October, to establish an integrated strategy towards sustainability in the federal government and to make reduction of greenhouse gas emissions a priority for federal agencies. There are many other parts to this executive order. It is about promoting clean energy, about reducing GHG pollution, about supporting green businesses, about building our capacity across the country for a green economy, and about growing jobs. Huge scope, the intervention point being sustainability. This has given us a tremendous umbrella under which we are thinking about what we can do to be an effective partner with our client agencies across the government. And to that end, we move to resource stewardship. Our focus at GSA is, and has been commonly reported, around a program we're calling ZEF, Zero Environmental Footprint. Now, this is an aspirational goal that our leadership agreed to about 1.5 years ago. And it's a really nice and important story because it isn't just about sustainability. It's about culture, and it's about the commitment of leadership. The GSA leadership is about 120 senior executives. We went off-site. We went on a field trip. We visited a company that was that has been since 1995 dedicated to reducing their energy footprint to zero. They've been working at it very hard. It's a carpet company in Georgia. We went on this field trip and visited this company, and during the visit, we realized that their commitment to sustainability and a zero footprint changed their product line, their financing model, their business model, their manufacturing model, and their supply chain model. It was a complete business intervention for them to declare a zero footprint goal. And I mean, for example, they are among the companies that have pioneered using carpet squares so that when you rip out a carpet, and put it in the dump, you're making a different choice and just ripping out a square and actually putting that back in the recycling, into a recycling mode. And so they had to change how they installed, how they designed and manufactured their product. They also moved much more to a leasing model rather than a purchasing model, which changes your whole financial projections. Very creative way in which it interrupted all of their business. So we as a GSA senior team took a look at this company and said, wow, this is a way to learn to transform yourself, take on something like sustainability. And so we said, well, how about it? Should we aim for something significant? And the entire senior team didn't even really think about it that hard. They had been so empowered by this example that we were visiting, this example company, and they were so energized by the complete picture, the complete portfolio of opportunity that they could see unfolding if we said we wanted to be a zero environmental footprint organization. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that we are taking very seriously our environmental stewardship role. And that sustainability work is something that if we do well, then the government can do it well. Really, we are the fulcrum here. If we aren't paying attention to sustainability, the government really can't make better decisions or have better information or expertise at their fingertips for making their purchasing decisions. So resource stewardship is kind of at the heart of how we see both what we do for our customers and how we are being energized into transformation. But it's not just about environmental stewardship. This isn't just an environmental exercise. This is also a management issue, because if you really look at it, a zero environmental footprint isn't just about getting rid of your GHG emissions. It is about no waste as a philosophy. And if you've been following industry over the last 30 years, there have been some powerful transformational efforts made across industry, total quality, total safety, where there has been a very concentrated effort around maximizing resources and putting a terrific focus by the whole organization in one direction. And the sustainability agenda here translates into no waste. If you're running a big organization and everyone is carrying the spirit of a no-waste ethic, you're going to see a tremendous change in behavior across the whole organization. It is much different than if I, as the senior person in the organization, say, stop wasting. It just doesn't work for me to be yelling at the organization about that. It's much better if the whole organization is embracing it and is caught up in the notion of a management ethic. So sustainability gives us a number of different ways in which we can be managing our organizations as well as our environment. I have a favorite notion about leadership, and it is that there are two things that you can do. One is you can help an organization become more efficient. You can sort of squeeze out the excess. At the same time, you also need to be asking, how can you judo? How can you completely flip what you're doing and do it differently? And this is where GSA is beginning to play a really important role with our client agencies. Let me give you a couple of examples. For years, we have been providing workspace for the federal worker. And now we are in a position where people don't have a whole lot of money to pay us rent. And they are trying to figure out how to do this, how to reduce their rent bills. So the first thing they do is they come and kind of plead and they beg. And we say, I'm sorry, we are authorized to charge you market rates, so we can't do much about the bill itself. So then you have to go to the question, well, then how much space do you need? And there are two ways of going around space reduction. One is to go around and be sort of a Nazi about this and, do as they do in the comics, do all kinds of irrational management things like squeezing people together in rooms and putting people on 3 shifts and all sorts of things that are rather top-down. Or you can go in and say, the world is changing, the workplace is changing, and in fact, people don't even really need to be in office space. Many people don't need to be there. So why don't we change our notions about what work is, and then we can see how space flows from that, rather than just trying to densify in the space that we have. So it is a judo question. It's about how is work done, not how can I squeeze my workers into smaller space. And that is the kind of thinking we need to bring over and over and over and over and over again to our clients. we're doing this in a couple of other examples, and I'm going to take you through some of those. But I want you to think of this judo mentality, because as the world is in this nearing these sort of extreme demands, the extreme demands of the environment, the extreme demands of the budget, we can't just go faster. We have to do things differently. And that's the judo mentality. So we are out there trying to deliver to our federal workers in a number of different ways. So I'm going to give you a sense of some of the things that we touch, and that will perhaps then invite you to choose the questions around the arenas that you're interested in. First of all, as I was alluding to, work is changing, and we believe that there is a very different workspace out in front of us, and we've been doing this for years as federal workers. That we call it telework. That's a government word for it, but it's about not necessarily working in a cube or at an office. And of course, the original teleworkers were our friendly astronauts. But work is not necessarily done in the big buildings that we've built, and technology now allows us to find ways in which we can enable workers to be wherever they need to be. Funny thing, they need to be with the people they're serving. They need to be with their clients. They need to be at conferences interacting with their networks. They don't need necessarily to be sitting in their offices, and we need to do everything we can to encourage future workspaces and to help people with mobile work. One friend of mine is really not happy with the notion of virtual work, because he says, I don't work with holograms, I don't work with avatars, I work with real people. I want to call it mobile work. But the notion is the federal workforce is on the move, and we need to support them so they can do the work where they need to do it, not live in this old industrial model that was fashioned in the late 1800s, in which the supervision needed to watch people, and people needed to be next to each other so you could do sign language, because not everybody spoke English. Those were the old industrial models, and we seem to have some of that DNA still in our system, and we keep thinking we need to watch people and we need to give them sign language about how to do their work. No, they're on computers, they can go work in all kinds of places. We're sort of changing culture here, and how we bring technology, furniture, change design, and buildings to our clients will encourage this. Now I'm going to talk about data centers. Data centers are a problem for the government. The private sector is beginning to figure this out, but the government seems to be proliferating data centers like rabbits. We have more and more and more data centers all the time. Data centers use up to 3% of all U.S. energy consumption. Data centers across the country, and we need to play a role in reducing data centers. There are two problems here. One is the cultural problem, and that is if you're the IRS, you want to have your own data center because you want to put a big barbed wire fence around it and you want to control it. Oh, and by the way, you need to build it for April 15th. You need to build it for the pulse amount that you're going to need it for, because you're not sharing with anybody, so you have to build it for your surge. Well, that is a tremendous amount of data center capacity that is not being used during the rest of the year. So we are at the forefront of trying to help agencies overcome their traditional behaviors of building a data center for every data set they need to run, and finding ways in which they can be more to be smarter about this. And the first thing, of course, is to start working in the cloud. Let's share in the great data center of the sky. And we have made some real progress on this last year. We ourselves, as I mentioned, have gone to the cloud to show them that it's possible. We also are developing some security protocols and getting through some of the other difficulties that that agencies have about thinking about the cloud. But it could make a tremendous difference in the federal government if we could be reducing the number of data centers. And so that is one place in which GSA is being pretty aggressive, and we're hoping agencies will catch up with us. The next arena is LEED buildings. LEED certification is promulgated by the U.S. Green Business Council, right? And they put forth a standard for buildings that would meet certain environmental performance levels. And this is an example of where we move markets. In the 1990s, we said, LEED, that's a good thing to do. We're going to lean towards LEED. And wouldn't you know it, it became really the popular and well-known standard. And this is a very fundamental issue we face in that the market movers can be the standard setters, and you've got to be careful because the standard setters need to be independent of size. They need to be carefully devised in the right process. At any rate, we went with LEED. We have some 36 GSA-owned buildings are LEED certified. 26 of our lease construct buildings have earned LEED certifications, and we lease space also in another 147 LEED certified buildings. This picture is of the San Francisco Federal Building. It's a LEED building, and it is a fabulous building. I don't know if you have driven from the airport into downtown San Francisco. It's on your left on the freeway. You can see it sort of sticking up out at you, and it stands out because of its design. It is a marvelous building to be in. There are a couple of special things about this building. One of them is, of course, the structure and some of the things that are done, such as where the elevators are placed and how the light comes in. But and here's a picture of the interior. There are also very important tenant behavior aspects of this building, which you can build a building, but if people don't function properly in it, they're not going to take advantage of the way it was designed. So the elevators in this building stop every third floor. One bank of elevators stops every third floor so that you have to walk up or down a flight rather than being taken to the floor that you always want to go to. So many of the people in the building use those elevators rather than the ones that stop at every floor. There's a way in which the tenants have to choose the green behavior as well, and we try to encourage that. A lot of information right at the lobby as you walk in, big screens telling you who and what and how the energy is being consumed. Informed consumers are good consumers. So our LEED buildings are a wonderful story. The Public Building Service has also engaged in something we call the Green Proving Ground. One of the things about having a big inventory of buildings is, first of all, everybody calls and complains about their air conditioning or something. But the second wonderful thing about it, so you have a great chance to interact with your clients, but the second great thing about it is that we have buildings in every congressional district. We have buildings across this country. Funny thing. And they are at every altitude, they are in every climate, they are urban, they are rural. We have a great test bed. The American people have a great test bed in their federal buildings portfolio, and so we are doing an active program which we call the Green Proving Ground, by which we are taking various clean technologies and putting them in these buildings in various places and giving them a chance to perform. And they are everything from chilled beams to smart windows to metering and so on. Interestingly, unless you're a buildings person, you just don't know this, and I think everyone should be aware of the fact that when you're in these kinds of buildings are very complex to manage. We think of building managers as kind of glorified janitors. Think of them as fighter pilots. They're running a very big and complex piece of machinery. And what's really interesting about a building, of course, is that you can set it up so it's perfect and you've got the air all balanced and the heat and the temperature all set up. And every morning at 9 o'clock, what? 2,000 people walk into the building? No, 2,000 little heaters walk into the building and walk all over the building and start distorting that perfectly designed and perfectly balanced building. And they do all the things that they do, and then they leave and they come back. And managing a building like the Ronald Reagan building is an extraordinary challenge. What we are learning to do is to sub-meter. So we meter in much more discrete microclimates, rooms, hallways, and now have computer programs that capture all that data and help us understand how to manage across a whole building. And in fact, we're wiring up a number of buildings so that we can compare usage patterns and just understand from evidence how these buildings can be better managed. It's amazing what a little bit of information will do. And so we have been, this is our courthouse in Boston, our new courthouse in Boston, well, new in the 1990s, beautiful building, and we're using it as one of these proving grounds, and it's an example of one of our larger buildings, but we're doing this experimenting and this testing across a great deal of our inventory. So then we move from green proving grounds to historic renovation. This is another good story. There is a wonderful little building. This is in Grand Junction, Colorado. And as you can see, it's a classic, beautiful federal building. You knew that was a federal building, right? You just could tell by looking at it. And it was built in 1908. It was built closer to about 100 years ago. And it serves Grand Junction, so it's both a courthouse and a federal building. You know, we kind of combine the branches in some of our buildings. We were there a couple of months ago holding a little conference around geothermal because this building has received some money in order to be renovated, and we're going to renovate it using geothermal, solar, some internal design and balancing, in other words, a whole portfolio of techniques. And we are going to, we estimate, enable this building to become a net zero building. This will be, when it's completed, the first building on the historic register that will be net zero. And this is important because it's one thing to build a highly efficient, sustainable building, but a whole lot of buildings are already built, and we need to retrofit them and figure out how we do this. The geothermal here is a lot of fun because, of course, you're on the western face of the Rockies, and there are a lot of people there who know about drilling, but they know about drilling for oil. And the guys who are doing our geothermal have transferred their credentials and their capabilities into the geothermal world, and they're so cute. They said a lot of geothermal right now is going into schools, into campuses, and they say that it's just a real joy because students and teachers and work in that environment is so much more fun than working out in the oil fields. So they got a good change of career. This is just a picture of our fabulous building museum here in Washington, and I just want you to see this picture because you can see what natural light does and how substantial and extraordinary our federal portfolio is in terms of buildings. And our challenge in doing historic renovation that is green is an important one, and one that I think can inform a lot of the country as it's thinking about what to do with its building stock. Importantly, you should know that your federal buildings already are 22% more efficient than their commercial counterparts. We've been doing this for 30 years. The first green building we put up was put up in the early 70s in Portland, Oregon. It's still there, and it doesn't leak. And it was our early example of some experimenting we were doing on using green roofs. The next thing I just wanted to touch on briefly, is energy savings performance contracts. I just want to tell you this because we've been doing this for a number of years, but these are sort of financing arrangements in which we can use public-private partnerships to upgrade buildings. An energy savings performance contract allows for a contractor to come in, assess your building, figure out what can be done better in terms of energy usage, invest in doing that, and then you pay that contractor back as you save that money. We're doing more of these. We've done some $300 million worth of these contracts. They're pretty important, and I think they're going to teach us a lot about new ways of conserving energy in buildings. So another source of innovation for the country. One other quick story. 1800 F Street, I'm sure you don't know about. It's the headquarters of GSA. It's downtown in Washington across from the Department of Interior. It had some 2,500 people in it. We received Recovery Act money to redo it, and it was built in 1917. It's the last major federal headquarters in Washington in which you see air conditioners hanging out of the windows. It has not been touched in a long time. In fact, it hasn't been touched since about the mid-1930s. We don't want to feather our own bed, so we haven't done anything with it, so there it sits. We got recovery money. We get to change it, 2,500 people in it. We moved a number of those people out. When this project is complete, we will move 6,000 people back in. We are going to consolidate all of GSA into that one building. We're not going to be able to complete it as soon as we thought because we're only getting half the money, so we'll move 4,500 people in about 13, 14 months. We're going to do it because we're going to change how we work. We're going to change the notions of who gets space and who doesn't, and how you apportion conference rooms, and whether or not everybody gets private offices. I have a very strong opinion about private offices, by the way. I'm going to share it with you now. And in this building, I have the third largest and very historic office in the federal complex, but it's going to be a conference center going forward. Private offices, to me, are an opportunity for people to come to work for us to have a substantial piece of real estate set aside for them that we heat, cool, and furnish and secure. And they come and they sit in their room, and then they go home. And my notion is if you need to come and work in a private office and be private and heads down work, stay home. It's just a whole lot easier on everybody, and it's probably even more private because the government spends a lot of time being sure your home is secure and private. And I mean that in a sassy way, but it's a genuine way we need to change our thinking. We come to work to collaborate, to work together, to find collective solutions. And so coming to work by yourself is a pretty expensive notion, and it's just not the way work is done anymore. Granted, there are a few people who do individual heads down work, but again, you want to come to a big busy building and try to do that? You know, there's a way in which we need to upend the apple cart and think differently about our work. So we're going first. We're trying this in our building. I think it's going to be very exciting. It's just wonderful to interrupt how we have done work in the past and to find all these new benefits from it. Okay, and again, I'm going to keep trying to move quickly because there's so much here. But let me put on the table the place where we feel we are really challenged and we need the best thinking out there. And this is with the problem of greening the supply chain. When you have millions of products, what can you do to move or make markets so that your customers are buying supplies that are more sustainable? What do you do? How do you do this? Do you mandate it? Do you say you don't get to buy anything except 100% recycled paper? Well, in that case, they'll go to Office Depot all by themselves and get what they want. Customers have choice, and so this is not entirely something you can mandate. Also, supply chain management is really tricky. It involves a number of concepts, and I want to take you through some of this because this is really a challenge. We've talked to Walmart, we've talked to Home Depot. Everybody is working this, and everybody is coming up a little stymied about how to do it. It's not as if there's a silver bullet out there. And I quote somebody who I can't remember, but I got this from somebody. He says, you know, life is not about silver bullets, it's about silver buckshot. There's a lot of different answers here. There's not one answer, and we haven't really quite got this mastered. But the first issue on supply chain management is we have to change our notions of life cycle. And we all know this. We can't be in this consumption and disposal routine. We cannot be thinking cradle to grave anymore. And GSA is in a wonderful position around this because, of course, one of our core competencies is design, which is the first front end of a product cycle. And we also are responsible for disposal. We dispose of everything on auction, through giving it to schools, donating property. We take care of disposal for the government. So we have the whole life cycle. So it's for us to ask this question. And we do believe we need to shift our thinking away from design to disposal to cradle, design to design. Design so that it can re-enter the life cycle. And so that is a philosophy that we're trying to use when we think about our supply chain. We also, of course, need to think about return on investment. You cannot be green, happy, and expensive. We have to find ways in which we are making viable business cases so that the motivation for doing this does not just come from the heart, it also comes from the purse. And I think that makes it stronger, and it's a discipline that we have to match anyway. This is tricky because there's short-term money and there's long-term money. There's short-term seed corn. The question is whether we eat our seed corn or we figure out a way to plant it and get the benefits later on. These are tough decisions when your budget's an annual budget, and the federal government is certainly, we're wrapping ourselves around the tree trying to figure out how to do this. But that's a very important balanced issue that we must face. We also have to think about risk mitigation. The government cannot be dependent upon a supply chain, truly dependent upon a supply chain that can be dramatically interrupted. There are companies now whose stock is suffering because of the floods in Bangkok, because their supply chains were interrupted. We are in a world where there's a lot of interruptions, and the government is not very tolerant about having too much of that interrupted. So we, as the suppliers to government, need to think very, very carefully about risk mitigation. And finally, we need to be intentional. This is such a sustainability issue. If you design something and it's kind of interesting, what you need to do is think about what it's going to look like at 2 billion. When you design those plastic water bottles, think 50 billion. What's that going to do? We have to think at scale. We have to be intentional about our decision making. We cannot make our decisions in these short-term box cleverness ways. We have to think about what happens when it goes to scale. And for us, that's very important because we operate at scale. So we try to carry that message in thinking as we think about design and as we think about the whole life cycle. And we have to be in partnership. You can't do this alone. This is not something we're going to figure out by ourselves. And to that end, we're lucky because we are the people that also do the social media for the government. So we are interested in finding ways in which we are communicating with the rest of the country, using challenges, using data.gov, USA.gov, and other methods, social media methods for gathering the best ideas around this in partnership. Greening the fleet really quickly. We have a big fleet, and last May we bought 116 electric cars. The deal about the electric cars is that we need to be looking aggressively at how we can be shifting the fleet so that it is not consuming as much as conventional fleets. At the same time, we're lucky because we, as I said, have buildings in every congressional district. We have the infrastructure where we can put the charging stations, because electric cars don't come by themselves. They need to come with charging stations somewhere, somehow. So we're lucky in that we can put that package together. And finally, in the quick list of things that we do, I want to mention e-waste. And I mention this for a number of reasons. Some of them are heartfelt and some of them are business. But e-waste is a significant environmental issue, and it's a significant women's and children's issue. So I always like to end with this one. Currently, our government disposes, remember we're in the disposal business, we dispose of some 10,000 computers a week. And that means there's a lot of e-waste going into the environment. Now, we don't send them off to those dumps in Africa and China because they're pretty good computers and they go to auction or they go to schools. But how do we, in a responsible way, affect where those computers end up? How do you do this? You know, we're the first buyers and then we sell, and how does it happen that at the end of the cycle they will be managed responsibly? First of all, we have thrown our efforts into assuring that there are a couple of recycling standards, which have only recently been developed and promulgated for e-waste recycling, and we're promoting those and encouraging the government to follow those. Second, and importantly, we are just wanting to raise awareness because it is the women and children in China who are climbing all over those piles of industrial waste, using those little Bic cigarette lighters to melt the soldering, to get the precious metal out, to put in a little cup, to carry to the top of that toxic dump to exchange for the bowl of rice they get that day. This is an issue of safety and health, women and children. It's not just a sustainability issue in the classic sense. So I always feel it's very important for us to raise our awareness about it. And we are all in a stage now where the rest of our lives we're going to be throwing off e-waste. And we need to learn how to be responsible about it. So GSA plays a big role in that, and we're eager to continue to learn about it and to be more and more effective and build ever more better programs around managing the government's e-waste. So with that, I'm going to questions, or I'm going to stop and move to the next piece, because I think someone else we're going to have another round and we're going to be able to talk together. At any rate, that's the high-level fast one, and I'll end there. Tom. Thank you. Want me here?
I think so, unless you have images, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, I think you can see why I was so excited at the idea of Martha coming and sharing some of this with all of you. So, Chris worries about this on a slightly smaller scale, but it's not a trivial scale either. He worries about it at the scale of the entire George Mason University. And so we'd love to get your thoughts on all of this and what is similar and what's different.
Well, it's very. I really appreciate the presentation. I'm honored to be here. I think listening to the presentation, there's so many similarities between the challenges we face at George Mason and the challenges that exist for the federal government. We're a university of about 30,000 students that, similar to your employees, come and go at very different points of the day. We have about 5,000 employees, so faculty and staff, again, similar issues with people coming and going. There's 300 vehicles within the university. So we're a microcosm, but there's still the same similar challenges that we face. A little background on the university, similar to the commitment that you guys have made regarding a zero footprint. We have a commitment called the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, and it's a commitment for climate neutrality by 2050. So that is what our office is currently charged with, is implementing that commitment. So again, there's a similarity. I think where our office is in charge of basically coercing the university as a whole into adopting more sustainable behaviors or purchasing or building. We also have a commitment for LEED buildings, so there's LEED Silver is our commitment, and so all new buildings are LEED Silver, and there's 4 currently. But areas I think that we can learn or gain from GSA and from the federal government are around the green proving grounds. So looking at technologies that are coming out that can also simplify and improve what we're dealing with on a business, on a university scale. Other things in addressing, I think, fleets and fuel. That's a huge one for our university. There's a variety of different things I think that we're facing that are similar to what GSA is facing. One particular thing that is of interest to me, I'm in the outreach and communications role for our Office of Sustainability. So it's a lot of student engagement and behavioral change. So looking at how do you get people to not use that plastic water bottle and make different consumer purchase decisions. So I think looking to successes that GSA has had with behavioral change at an employee or on a federal level is of interest. So those are a short, brief snapshot of some of the similarities, and I think the differences are just bringing the scale down onto our level. I'm excited. I hope that GSA can take the green proving ground and different things that are coming out with regards to technology and put those out there for universities and for citizens to kind of learn from.
Great. So I'd like to start off with a question, which is, where did your interest in sustainability first get started? Yeah, well, both.
You go first.
Well, I think mine actually started from, I grew up in Fairfax County and was close to a park there called E.C. Lawrence Park. And I think when you're immersed in nature at a young age, you kind of grow some sort of appreciation for it. It's about an 800-acre park. Fairfax County, as you know, is fairly suburban. There's a lot of development there, so I was very fortunate to back up to that. And so as life went on, I really continued to have an appreciation for that. And one point actually that you made is it kind of extends my interest in environment and in nature, is the opportunity for sustainability to be kind of a uniting issue. So you have business and you have kind of the environmental interests, and sustainability is the one area that these two things can kind of come together on and find common ground. So I was the middle boy of 3 brothers, and I think always looking to play the mediator, and sustainability was a great mediation tool throughout life. So.
I'm not sure I'm going to get this out right, but I have a line about how I'm compost user, yogurt maker, regifter, put the hat on mama. And I've always been in a family life where there's been both a frugality and a sensibility about not wasting. So I tend to go there, although it's always bad to be in an ethic that starts with no, no waste. My grandmother was an agricultural major at Cornell in 1917, and I remember her as pretty ferocious and scary because she had a big voice and a lot of opinions. But she would always boil the vegetables and then make us drink the water because she was a nutritionist as well. And, I just came from a family that was like that. So I think it's a little bit too much in my blood. I will say that in my professional life, when I began to understand how powerful sustainability is as a transformational mechanism for our organizations, and this isn't just a business approach, it's really truly saying, is our institutional structure going to live through all the dramatic changes we're going through? I think sustainability is a good way to relook at our organizations and think in new ways about how they can be, they can serve the country better. So I have a pretty strong strategic morphing of those sort of personal fetishes, and am delighted to find that it is as powerful, and other people have picked up on it so much.
Well, it just makes me think of a question I got yesterday, which was, we had the Earth Summit in Rio 20 years ago. Why do we need another one? And my answer was, 20 years ago, the main product was 2 conventions and something called Agenda 21, which was sort of a sustainability agenda, but it sort of faded away. And what Rio Plus 20 is going to be about is, bringing all these things together in terms of sustainable development, just the kinds of things that we're hearing here. How do you design an economy so that it puts value on sustainability? How do you deal with governance? What about the private sector? So there's a lot of resonance here at all different kinds of scales. So let me throw it open for questions on the aisle.
Hi. You mentioned a few things about what you're doing to improve your buildings and sustainability and reduce energy use, but what systems do you have in place to evaluate your infrastructure, the non-building stuff that you manage?
You mean like the vehicles and...
The vehicles, the bridges, the dams.
Luckily, that's the Department of Transportation. So I will say that there is a lot of activity that goes on in assessing the health of those structures that I am aware of, and I think that the sustainability measures that we're learning about in our buildings, this is evolving all the time. In fact, the metering that we're doing is sort of taking us to another generation of understanding what we need to be measuring and what not. I am a little bit concerned that we have fallen in love with measures too much. I mean, we're having a little bit too much of a love affair with measures and sort of forgetting about the point of them. And I say this because I come from a Six Sigma world where there was a lot of emphasis on managing to the Six Sigma. And I hate to tell you, but the government isn't managing much beyond like Second Sigma. And, if we're going to worry about the pennies and nickels and forget about the dollar bills and the $5 bills, we're obsessing where we are not. We should be more strategic about getting after some of the big rocks in the river that we could take care of. And right now our measurement systems are taking a lot of energy, and I'm not sure we're getting that extra sigma of value out of it. So I just caution us in our measurement systems to keep sensible about this and build flexibility so we can add measures as we need to, but not stop the world for the measures and then lose all our energies.
Paolo.
Thank you. I have 2 kinds of questions. One, I'm curious about when doing this work on sustainability, do you look to other places, other countries that maybe are doing interesting things that serve as example, or is this in such a scale that you are sort of by yourself and you have to invent this from scratch? And this is the first question. So what are there other good examples in terms of government managing property and infrastructure, etc.? The other is a little, I have been here for 5 years, and sometimes I stay until late in the evening or come on weekends, because you work more efficiently if you don't have a lot of people around you, right? Or sometimes I work at home a lot. But I was told, I have one of those offices with a big window, and first thing I did was to open the shade. Because if I do open it and keep it there, I don't need to turn on the light. I can work. But I was told that there is a regulation that tells me that the shade has to be half drawn, and it's the GSA that has that.
Oh,
Okay, no, it gets
good
better.
to know.
It gets better. Then I am here on the weekend, and all the lights are on. Sometimes I turn off the ones here. For instance, I know how to turn this one off, so I go there and turn it off. Because I grew up in a household where you have to do that. You're supposed to do that. But then there is always this thing. There is this GSA Deus Ex Machina that mandates that lights are on for some. I don't know. This may be the cents and nickels instead of the dollars. But I just
No, it isn't.
since you know the answer,
Well,
I'm very curious.
First of all, we work with a number of other countries, and in many different ways. We have a great alliance with Canada. We draw from a lot of the expertise in Germany, and recently we have an annual buildings group that gets together, and they have Japanese, Europeans, South Americans. I can't remember all the countries, but it's probably about 12 or 15 countries that get together and sort of swap stories. There's a lot to know and a lot to learn from each other, so there's no way in which we are doing this alone. The second question is that there is, we certainly have building managers that manage the buildings. I was just fussing around because at our building site all the lights are on all night, and unfortunately there are security issues that we have to balance out, and so you have to dig into each one. So I don't know what the answer is particularly. Now there is a building in southern New Hampshire that I was just learning about, a government building where all the tenants have gotten together and decided that they're going to really conserve energy by pulling the shades at certain times of the year in certain ways. You know, you put them up in the summer to get the sun, and then you put them down, and so on and so forth, so the heat and the cooling work best. And I think we're beginning to learn about better ways in which we actually manage the tenants. Up until now, a lot of this is just mechanical, where the lights are set automatically, and we need to explore each one of those and get into it. I'll find out, though. The Ronald Reagan building is a pretty big building. I don't know whether it's all sensors or not. Apparently not. We'll say yes. Where do you want to go next?
Shall we go in the middle there, in the back?
I'm Mitzi Wertheim with the Naval Postgraduate School, and I'm working with the Navy. We are building a course for senior leadership in the Navy about how to hopefully change their thinking, feeling, and behavior about energy. McKinsey just came out with a report on resources, but they absolutely ignored the behavior piece, and it seems to me the behavior piece is a very important part. And so I was thinking about trying to get the Defense Department to come together and put into the performance plan. It can't be for everybody. I mean, I understand that. But for where it's appropriate, put in the performance plan an energy measurement. Have you thought about doing anything with OPM and getting performance plans? And again, you have to think about it carefully. It's kind of like there's not a single answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a couple of things. One is I do believe leaders do need to model, and I do like to tease those guys over in the Defense Department about their big old black cars. I mean, I run around in a little hybrid, and I think I'm more secure. Nobody knows I'm a government official. So I'm real secure, and they just really have a love affair with those big old cars. So we're working on that one. That's one subject.
By the way, Jimmy Carter changed that, but it got moved back when Reagan came
Oh
in.
yeah, everybody wants choice, and they guess what their choice is. It's leather seats and big cars. However, that aside, and I think it's very important for me to be doing modeling such as giving up my very large office and working in a cube, and I make a big deal about that. I just figure might as well. And I do. I work in a little cube with a little, low risers, and I have my chief of staff right next to me, and we all sit in an open area. And if I can do it, lawyers should be able to do it, contracting officers should be able to do it, and personnel people should be able to do it. We have our little, rooms you can go to for your quiet OBGYN calls and all that stuff. But, I sit in an open office. I believe very much in modeling. But there's a limit to modeling, and you need to do more. You need to have some other techniques. And yes, I have thought about this performance issue, and this is how and I hope you're not tweeting, because this is not something to tell the world yet, everybody. I'm working on it. But I think we're close to being able to say to our senior executives that we can give them we can give them an energy measure. We have a tool that we're working on at GSA, which allows you to assess your impact as an organization. And it takes into account your commuting patterns, what square footage you use, how many printers you have, all that sort of thing. And I want to give them one number. And I want to say, this is what your energy profile number is. Get it down. And you have a lot of techniques. You can do teleworking. You can all share printers. In fact, the best investment is to buy, those little, what do you call them? Where you wear it and it counts how many steps you take. Pedometers. Get everybody a pedometer, and don't invest in printers. And tell them they all have to get to 14,000 steps a day. They'll walk to their printers and back, a lot. Kind of come up with some other ways in which they're thinking about their printers, because they all groan and moan about having to walk to the printers, and we're running a wellness campaign at the same time, and, it just doesn't seem to connect. So I want to give them that one number and say, you fix your commuting, you fix your teleworking issues, you fix your printing issues, you fix your space issues. You can do one or all of those things, but just get your number down. I don't think we're quite at prime time yet with that tool and those numbers, and I haven't rolled this out yet, and it's going to be kind of a messy year because we're going to learn about it. But yes, I think that's how you do it. I do not want to be measuring everybody on there, how many printer ratio to employees and how much commuting and all that. I want to have one number, and they manage all this portfolio to that. They can choose if they want a big car or if they're going to share cars and make everybody stay home, how they want to use the little energy that they should be consuming.
One other question is, I'm impressed that you're working with other countries or sharing information.
Mm-hmm.
There is a hubris in this nation that we're the best. It would be really useful if you would put on your website what we've learned from others.
That's good to, and I don't know if we already have it. We certainly have had formal meetings with them, so I think some of that's up. But yes, I agree. We should acknowledge where we're learning, and where we're sharing, how we're partnering. Partnership is very important in all of this.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. In the back.
All the way in the back.
I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet and Emerald Planet Television Productions. And this is to Martha and somewhat to Chris as well. But when most of the buildings that you have, or many of the buildings you have, are in inner city, like Washington, D.C., St. Louis, and all these other places. And, of course, one of the things that you brought up was about fitness, health. All this goes together. And, of course, your inner city of the United States, we have many citizens that are obese, and, it's a lifestyle choice. Green vegetable deserts and all these other things. Is there any way to combine what you're doing with these retrofits of these historical buildings and putting in green roofs with where you're actually producing energy, solar, the grasses and other things to filter the water, but also include food production in that as well, and that's going into maybe even the restaurants within federal buildings and are being put into the local farmers market, so that we're completing an entire cycle of what we're doing. And then going to George Mason, it's almost a perfect environment because you have a lot of land space but buildings that maybe could do a similar kind of thing. So it's just kind of combining mixed uses of buildings, but it's, again, to the horizon of what we're looking at for this new building retrofits.
Well, I'll speak to George Mason, and we have a number I would say sustainable agriculture is a big interest on the university campus, and we see agriculture as somewhat of it's a lever to a larger conversation. So I think everybody can relate to food and good taste of food and local fresh food, and so we use that as a lever to talk about larger sustainability issues. And as a result of that, we have a number of gardens, organic gardens, actually on campus, and we're working towards actually providing and selling our produce into the contractor that provides food services for the university. So that's taking place in some respects already on Mason's campus, and I'm sure that since our university can learn so much from the federal government, maybe there's an opportunity to have the inverse.
I'm trying to think about the Canadian Embassy has a garden on its roof. You can't see it from the street, but every time I go there, they take us up and show us all their basil and all that sort of thing. And we do run farmers markets in a number of our facilities now. That's a real exciting thing that the local communities and the local building managers and so on are doing. We also are responsible for the franchises for the cafeterias. And we are in the process, in fact, it's a particular emphasis to be sure that we are upgrading those so that there is more local and more nutritional emphasis on what's being served. And I think that's moving. The Department of Interior cafeteria, for example, it's a newly renovated one. It has a lot of wonderful food in it. So it's all over the place. We are downtown in a fair number of places, but we're also, we really have inventory all over. We do the land ports of entry, for example, very remote. And this is off the subject of growing food, but we have very serious conversations about how best to power those kinds of remote buildings. And we do more alternative solar and so on installations when we are upgrading our border stations for that reason, because they're isolated and it would cost so much to bring things in. So we really have some opportunity both with where buildings are and based on the kind of communities of people in those buildings, what they want to do. One of the things about our federal buildings is there are a lot of agencies in the same building, and it's a tremendous way for them to get together and maybe solve some of the silo and stovepipe problems of government just by having the people who all work in a building, they're sharing the cafeteria and to enjoy farmers markets and so on. It's absolutely where much of this comes together, and I think we're going to see more and more of it.
Great. So all the way back in the corner.
The president has been flying all over the country making speeches about sustainability. And the news reports that the president is speaking such and such a place, and the message is totally lost in the third paragraph or beyond. Now, for those trips are very expensive, and probably for the cost of one or two of those trips, he could take the White House off the grid completely, which could have a substantial impact. I don't know if the White House is one of your buildings, but is there a possibility of something like that happening?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. And we are engaged right now in a substantial renovation of the White House. If you go on Google Maps, you'll see some big holes around it, and it is infrastructure. We are the concerns at the White House are, of course, redundancy, so that they absolutely never go down. I wouldn't want that call. So I'm not sure I know too much about the energy plan for the White House itself. I know in our upgrade of the old executive office building, which is part of the White House complex and has been renovated for years because it's historic renovation, it's really tricky. But we have been finding so much value in that renovation due to the design when it was originally designed, which had, cross winds and natural light, and we're able to take advantage of that in a way that we managed to paint over things and do things over the last it was around during the Civil War, so it's been around for quite a while. I think our historical renovation people are delightful because they can talk and show you how much was sustainable about the building originally and how we've morphed it away and we have to morph it back. So I can speak more to that building than the White House. The White House is a very peculiar building because it's been added on and there's so many complexities to it. And I tell you, every tree is historic, so you can't be digging around it, So it's a very tricky place, and it's not. It is a showcase, but we're really trying to practice elsewhere for the benefit of the nation in a more aggressive way. But it is true that he needs to model, and I think that the First Lady is with her garden and so on. It's a wonderful statement. The Clinton administration did have a garden on the roof. And for a variety of reasons, we don't control the roof. But anyway, but they've been, but the garden on the grounds itself is a much better idea than on that roof with all those security people trying to trample around on it too.
So it's
Peculiar place.
It's an interesting point that there are important historical lessons in how things
Very
were
much.
built and constructed, and that went through my head when you showed the National Building Museum, because it was the best natural air conditioning of its time. So, and I should ask people if they'd be good enough to identify themselves when they make a point. Paul.
Yeah, I'm Paul Schuck. I'm professor at George Mason, former dean of research in the College of Science, and was 20 years at NASA before going there. I never thought of GSA as a scientific agency, but you just laid out a huge, your building says experimental as test beds and everything else. What is the size and structure of your research organization within GSA? I mean, it's not a trivial thing. You just outlined it.
Right, it isn't. We actually have we have a policy shop, our version of this sort of thing. And our policy shop sets government-wide policy. So we set policy for the behavior of federal employees, such as with travel, things like that, vehicle fleets and so on. And so we do have a green buildings section to our policy shop, and they are really expert. They've done some tremendous work. We're really considered the source of some of the major thinking that has been going on around how to take care of these big, huge organizational buildings. And Kevin Kampshire is the head of it, and he's a very well-known expert on this and does a lot of speaking around the country. So he did a 2020 report recently outlining a lot of impacts and how you do buildings, how you manage them. The focus has been on managing the buildings as much as constructing them. Because we do build buildings for like 100 years, so we need to think as much about what we're doing when we throw it up as how it's used over the course of its life. And so he has contributed greatly around tenant behavior, and tenant behavior is really the key. The Carpenters Union will tell you that if you build it and you leave a big hole, yes, it will be drafty and you'll waste energy, but ultimately you can fix that and then you still have the tenants to deal with. There was an interesting study in which they compared, and I do believe this was on a military base, they compared three types of housing. One was a LEED platinum structure, one was efficient but not to that standard, and another one was conventional. And the structure that wasted the most energy was the LEED structure, because the people living in it weren't paying attention to their bills in the same way because they thought they had a LEED building. Behavior is really underneath a lot of this, and so that's what we've spent a lot of time on. By the way, the Congress has recently passed legislation, good micromanagers that they are, and this legislation has instructed us to create a certification and credentialing for building managers, because this is such a complex profession that we haven't really set the kinds of standards for that we need. And it's a good idea, and so he is also advising on the curriculum for that, and that's what we're putting together now in our policy shop. So a number of different aspects to it. I can put you in touch with any of those people if you're interested. But
That's
yes,
great.
Research.
So back on the aisle there.
James Sang, IBM, retired. GSA in many locations is a major customer of utilities. I was wondering if you could talk about your interaction with utilities, in particular, given current interest in distributed generation, whether you've tried to encourage utilities to be interested in cogeneration schemes and things like that.
This is not where I'm as much of an expert as I need to, but we are certainly looking at renewables, and we're looking at these ESPC arrangements so that we can be engaged in programs where we can be reducing the energy that we have bought, how we're using it. We're a little hampered because we want to do more public-private partnership kinds of efforts around buying renewables, but we cannot enter into any contracts longer than 10 years, and that is constricting us from real engagement with the private sector because they want a longer time frame, more like 20, 25 years. So we have been raising this issue repeatedly, saying we could be more aggressive with energy suppliers if we could enter into a longer deal with them. At the same time, we have some interesting campuses. We have a big Denver Federal Center, for example. It's, I don't know how many acres, 30 acres or something, with a lot of buildings on it. And we're doing some interesting things there. We have some solar work and some geothermal work, and we're trying to do, thinking about it as a campus so that we're buying and distributing, more efficiently. It's kind of everything on the spectrum.
We're actually putting in a new energy system right now, a new boiler for the west side of campus, and that's one of the things we're looking at is cogeneration. Not my field of expertise, but it looks promising, and it looks like that is what we're going to go in with.
The very patient man, yeah.
Tim Rash, I work in one of the federal buildings.
Excellent.
Federal offices in this building. And so one of our challenges, but I'm not in the sustainability team or whatever, is an optic that we're renters, our tenants, and the landlord charges us for our space. And therefore there are no apparent financial incentives. I don't think we're metered yet. Here in RRB, but there's your points about changing tenant behavior is so important. It's, that people are not turning out their lights. They're not printing two-sided. They're not separating their waste, kinds of things. So there's a whole suite of low cost, no cost, sustainability things that we could do in addition to financial incentives to be one of the federal agencies that's a leader in this building or any building.
Absolutely. There needs to be a better set of incentives and frankly, data, so that people can see how they are managing their space. I was in Oberlin, Ohio recently, and there's a lovely little complex they've put up there where as you walk along the street, there are, there are monitors, screens right there that are churning the usage data of the apartments in that building right there on the street. You can go down to the public street and you're looking at how much you're using over your next door neighbors. I think there's a lot you can do with friendly competition, data sharing, data awareness, and that's something we're beginning to appreciate much more, and we need to build better mechanisms for it. We also are we're in an interesting time because so much of our building portfolio right now is getting attention in Washington. We're across the country, but a lot of our portfolio is here right now with recovery money. There's a lot of emphasis on it, and we're doing more and more work to having our building managers set up in those kinds of little competitions, whose building is operating better. And that's where some of those examples up in New England are so profound because they're in really, really cold climates and they're doing some very, very efficient things. So nationally, we're pulling our data together in a way of engaging all the people, handling all of these million square feet so that we can get into it better. But we're doing it at kind of a macro level, and there's all kinds of stories at the micro level, but the incentives need to be more visible to you. If we might have a recycling contract on the other side of your building, but you're not aware of it, and the janitorial staff is separating the items. Well, that's kind of crazy. We could maybe do that a little bit better if everybody separated it at the source. So, more to come on that. I'm sure you're going to be seeing more changes in the next year or two.
So, an anecdotal sort of confirming point about behavior is Dominion Power sort of provided a gizmo that I have in my kitchen, which means I see my electric use when I'm in the kitchen, and I turn the hot water on, and it goes like that, So I don't use very much hot water. Really very effective.
That's like your new hybrids now. You put that on.
All the way back in the corner.
Hi, I'm Kent Hughes here at the Wilson Center. Martha, that was impressive and inspiring, although
He's an old friend.
I'm not quite ready for boiled vegetable juice.
Yeah, really. Pretty awful.
I was struck by a comment you made that the GSA buildings are 22% more efficient than their
Yeah.
private sector counterparts. Is there a systematic way of transferring your lessons, experience, approaches, and so forth to those private sector buildings?
Systematic. Systematic. Well, overall, we are 22% more efficient. We've installed the light bulbs. We've done a lot of basic work, and we've been investing since the 70s. A lot of this is because we put in the investments early on, and this happened because of the oil crunch, the oil crisis in the 70s. Suddenly we were like, what if we don't have the energy we need? So we got on it early, and we've done a lot of the things you can't see in terms of upgrading the heating systems and double glazing the glass and all that sort of thing. The private sector watches us a fair amount. We are in a lot of those kinds of we speak at a lot of forums. We share a lot of our information, and they do watch us. But bottom line, it is about them doing a systematic inventory of their building and then investing in the thing that is sucking the most energy and moving on. And we've done a lot of that. Now we need to tackle things like tenant behavior. That is really what I hear more and more about. It's not that, oh, well, we have these windows and they're just pouring energy out. I just know that they're really drafty, and so we don't have as much of that kind of complaint as we do exactly what we were hearing earlier. People aren't turning out the lights. So I think we're kind of in a stage 2. We continue to need to upgrade our facilities, and Recovery Act gave us almost $5 billion to do that, which is being invested across the country in various programs. So,
on the aisle. Thank you. I'm John Selman with LMI in McLean, Virginia. So the question is for both of you. There's a lot of talk about energy throughout, and it's very warranted. What about water? Where does that fit into the equation for both of you, both from a direct usage standpoint and as well as the supply chain?
Our university is starting to really measure that and monitor it. And I think coming back to actually the behavioral change questions and looking at tenant behavior, again, we have thousands of university students that are on campus for a short period of time that live there, are showering, and so it's looking at their behaviors and how to reduce water consumption. And from the studies that I've seen, the water consumption reduction and actually shutting off lights are probably the two behavior changes that seem to have the most impact. So we're starting to dive deeper into that, but at the moment it's more about trying to create the metrics to figure out how do we address those specific behaviors.
Water is very important in our program as well. Wastewater, and it is one of the things that we've invested in with the Recovery Act money that we had in checking out the systems in as many buildings as we could, where we could find the right techniques and things to engage in. It is important, and it is about behavior as well. Obviously, our buildings aren't necessarily dorms, but some of them are housing. But we have to do the assessment and figure out what needs to be done. It's right up there. It's right up there because it's expensive, and given where we are, there are places where we have to be particular stewards of a very precious asset that isn't very plentiful. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm Mitzi Worth. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. I think it's terribly important for people to always identify themselves, so I will do it multiple times. Last year, I had the chance to hear the head of the District of Columbia water system speak. Has a PhD from Yale. Rather smart guy. Says that the water we get out of Blue Plains is so good that we shouldn't have any questions about using bottled water in our areas. The concern is the pipe between the water system and into your house. So if you have an old house, might be a reason to have bottled water. But for all the buildings that I go to and watch, government buildings, where you're not using bottled water here. But again, it's here.
No, I mean,
Right. These are stories that people have to hear. Now, I was just lucky enough to be at the meeting at the World Bank, and I heard this. But I don't know how you get these stories out. I think I, too, am enormously impressed with what you're doing. And I met with Kevin when he was in the older when we were the former administration. I understood all the problems back then. But you've got great stories, and this administration is not very good at telling these fabulous stories. You've got lots of stories to tell, and we're not hearing them.
Well, you know, it is interesting. I was the chief of staff at GSA in the 90s, my prep job for this round. And in those days, and this is at the top of my performance plan. GSA in those days really is not known, and GSA didn't go out of its way to be known. You really didn't want to be above the fold. It was perfectly fine if you thought GSA was the Girl Scouts of America or Gay Straight Alliance or something else. Please don't call us. And I think that we have begun to understand how important our story is. Even though it's just about the government, that's an important story. So it's interesting how my job is mostly about brand building. It's about getting out and telling the stories. And it's not just for marketing purposes, if you will. It's really because the toggle switch conversation we're having about yes government, no government just doesn't accommodate the sophistication and the complexity and the importance of some of the work of the government. And I have a lot of that because we're this fulcrum, so we can talk about everything. So yes, I take that very seriously. I've been out a lot, and that's part of the job I wasn't expecting. I just wasn't expecting to be doing that, but that's what I do. Aspen Institute and everything else.
Yes. Yes.
On the telecommuting side,
Yeah.
one of the pushbacks that I've heard is that we're shifting the greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. government pocketbook to the individual pocketbook.
I mean, they have to heat their houses.
They have to heat their houses. They have to run the
I've heard
lights.
that.
They have to do the home office and such. And so the government is offloading its emissions and not making a difference. Now, I think commuting costs, and I think we're still coming out ahead as a nation. But do you have any thoughts on whether we're creating an undue financial burden on employees by asking them to telecommute and work elsewhere?
Actually, no. It's completely the other way. That's one of those urban myths I love to be able to talk about. It is true that when people work at home, they do have to kind of heat their houses unless they want to, wrap up in the winter and so on. But the commuting that we have to do in Washington, D.C. anyway, is by far is offset. Now, what we have done, and this is not in the real research academy sense, but we've done an informal kind of an assessment of when and where and how important is telework financially. Telework is the government's word for working at home usually. And if you work at home 1 day a week, there really is not too much benefit to either employee or the government. 1 day a week, it's kind of a wash. 2 days a week, it's kind of a wash as well. 3 days a week is when you can start sharing offices. And at that point, the scale really tips to it being of significant benefit because if you can reduce space, that's the biggest cost behind salaries. So that goes a long way. 4 days a week is even much more. Now, at 5 days a week, we estimate that there could be as much as $7,000 a year back in an employee's pocket. And if you start counting the lunches, the wardrobe, the commute, the manicures, the haircuts, the dye, all that stuff, it really can add up. And so we are firmly in the camp that this is actually a benefit to employees financially. We need to do a much more rigorous job of actually laying that out. But it's pretty clear that that's true. There is one other story I want to say about space usage since you got me going. One of the things we have learned from the private sector, and we have confirmed, Kevin Kampscher's confirmed this many times, is that on any given day in an office building, well, let's say actually on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday in an office building in the United States, usually the occupancy rate is in the 40 percentile. Mondays and Fridays, it's in the 30s. Won't comment on that, but basically the point is that we have buildings that we are building because we're designating individual space for everybody. That means we're building twice the building stock. We're maintaining heating, cooling, securing twice the building stock that we really need. So this isn't even a densification issue. You come over to our swing space, which we took down all the walls, and we're in open spaces. There's nobody there. It really feels empty, and it's because we're in the classic norms of everybody else. We just do not have people. They're with clients, they're teleworking, they're doing other things. And it isn't until you take the walls down that you see that. That's one of my arguments for open space collaboration, but it also tells you that it's an empty place. We didn't know this until we took down the walls. Back in the corner.
Dave Rabinowitz, and I'm looking at this room right here and looking at the lighting, and I notice incandescents all over the place, very high wattage stage lights, which are just heating without getting much light. And I figure a very simple change would cut the energy use by at least a factor of 3. And I assume that there are incandescents in there because they want them to be dimmable. And so this raises my question, are you working specifically on getting better LED lamps out there? Because there are LEDs just starting to get to the market. They're very poorly designed. And is GSA working on getting better lighting so that we can actually clean this up?
Lighting is one of the big things we're working on, and it is clear that there are a lot of options, and the market is changing very quickly. And when you have a big, huge infrastructure like ours, it's like you don't want to make one decision. You want to try out a lot of different things and see what's going on. And there are a lot of different kinds of spaces, interior, exterior, where the needs are different. Absolutely, it's always sort of a bunch of trade-offs when you're looking at presentation environments as opposed to work environments. Now, one of the things that I'm quoting Kevin an awful lot, Kevin Campshire, our green building guy, but he makes a strong argument that we way overlight our offices. Somehow over the last century, we have turned the lights up and up and up and up. I don't know if it's that we want to see our great makeup jobs or what, but it's just gotten brighter. And at GSA, it's interesting, in the old building, more and more people are keeping their lights off because they're working on the computer screens anyway. And you walk down the hallway and you think everybody's asleep because the rooms are all dark. But it is kind of catching on in our building, and I think people are aware. These are the kinds of things that we're learning about and changing our behaviors, and we'll have to figure out how to roll these things out properly so that people don't go, you blink in one way and it goes a lot. You want to be careful what you're doing. So education is important.
Great. So why don't we make that the last question, please? Did you have a question? Yeah, okay.
I want to ask about collaboration. I mean, your idea of somebody not going, I guess I telecommute because I work for the Naval Postgraduate School, but I live here in Washington. I'm aware of how important it is to have face-to-face contact with people, and the collaboration, the emotional experience of talking to someone. I could have stayed home and watched this, I guess, on the web. It would have been a very different experience for me, and I'm not sure I would have gotten a hell of a lot out of it. So working out this appropriate balance, I think, is very delicate. The other thing I wanted to say was with this money we got from the White House, the Navy put in an enormous number of meters out in our housing out in San Diego. But most people don't have meters. I mean, we don't have the Prius, which tells us it's exactly right that, you turn on the hot water and it goes up. And unless we get to a point where it's easy to get meters, I want a meter. I want my house metered, but not just in general. I want to know what happens when I run my dishwasher or my washing machine, or the technology doesn't seem to be out there yet for us to have it in an easy fashion.
A couple of things. One is that when we moved to Swing Space, we moved a couple thousand people over to Swing Space while our building's being renovated. And we did all the usual things about our vision and our ideas about this, and we had collaborative conversations. And one of the principles that we voiced about our new space was the principle of presence. And it made us think about when do we need to be together and when do we not need to be together. And the assumption up until now is you just all need to be together all the time, although half the people aren't there. Well, that's been a big fantasy that we've had. But what does it mean to be together? When do you need to be together? And, my story is, I'm married. I don't need to be with my husband 24 hours a day. This is a really bad idea. We do not need to be together all the time. We need to be intentional when we are, and we need to design it and use it and make the most of it because it's precious. But I worked in a global company. I had teams in India and Australia, never met them, but the one time a year you did meet each other, it was really a powerful experience, and you can pack a lot in. I think we're in a different world now. I agree there's a lot of flatness when you're online. It doesn't encourage the same thing. So when do you put the extra effort into being present rather than assuming presence all the time? I think we're together a lot in way too casual ways that don't matter. And yet we also need to flip to the other things. Now, I will say I was out in Silicon Valley recently, and I was visiting one of the venture capital companies there, and they were doing one of those speed dating things where we got 10 minutes and a company would come through and tell us what they were doing. And there's some very interesting stuff happening in metering. I think it's breaking in because people are beginning to want to know. And as they want to know, more and more gadgets are coming in and they're talking to each other in different ways. I think we're going to be seeing more of this. It's all just ballooning right now. So stay tuned.
That's great.
One more
you had a question.
Manly Norris. I used to do work for Anacostia Watershed Society. We would administer the DDOE's Green Roof Rebate Program. And a few weeks ago, I was in Philly for the annual Green Roof Conference, and there was a lot of talk about bringing, everyone knows the environmental benefits and the public benefits of green roofs, and this is just sort of a good example, but everyone talked about bringing the market down so people, so it was a good ROI, good return on investment. And you mentioned the importance of that. But a lot of people, a few people, not enough, talked about the accounting changes that needed to be made by businesses. And Al Gore wrote a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this morning about different changes that need to be made. I wanted to know if GSA uses any innovative accounting principles like triple bottom line, or when they evaluate an investment, do they look towards the long term and consider more of the environmental benefits of an investment? And to sort of lead the way in that respect.
I will say that one of our biggest challenges is exactly this, and it is because we're part of the federal government, we're in an annual budget cycle, and we're scored. So our budgets are scored. So we have a very, very constricted way in which we can look at money. OMB does not want our money to be at any risk at all. So we are... I'm hoping we are in a time where we can begin to pose the notion of a different level of risk. But for example, when we build a building, we do not borrow money to build a building. We have to have all that money in the bank. Then we build the building. And it's because we just won't engage in other kinds of arrangements based on the rules. I think there is room for new creativity because right now we have no money coming in because they've slashed those budgets. So we're at an inflection point. It'd be very interesting to watch this going forward. So that's one thing. The second thing is the notion of accounting, and I know you struggle with this too. It's like what's the life cycle cost of things, not just the close-in ROI, and we do need shifts in the accounting structures. When that then backs up into the federal system, we'll be in a different place. But this is a huge challenge. It goes to the short-term eat your seed corn problem, and whether or not you're going to figure out a way in which you're going to have seed corn every year. And we're down to short strokes right now in this economy, and we're thinking very short-term. And I'm sure hoping this passes fast and we start having more strategic decision-making going on as we make our investments.
So, Chris, do you run into those same kinds of issues?
You must.
Oh, entirely.
The big ones.
Yeah, they're the same challenges with investment in infrastructure. It's a consistent problem and kind of looking long-term. We are fortunate enough where we just had a grant pass that allows students to propose projects that are infrastructural in relation, that are long-term, so that students can actually look at, what about things that don't necessarily have a payback over a 3-year lifespan or a 3-year period in time. and they're the drivers for that. So we're hoping that there's more of that funding and those types of things ultimately pay back. I know that a number of universities have programs where similar grants set up for long-term infrastructural improvements, and the energy savings for that actually go back into the grant, so that it's a fund that can invest in other new programs. So it's a challenge.
So I think what we have seen this afternoon, that whatever the constraints may be, like the long-term considerations being hard to actually get the ideal, that there's just huge space here for creativity and opportunity to make tremendous strides in sustainability. So please join me in thanking our two great speakers.